The recruitment station on Kepler 442b smelled of ozone and desperation. Commander HFY of the Altarian Defense Corps stood before the holographic display, watching species after species pledge their fleets to the Alliance cause. The Crimson Horde had swept through 17 systems in the past month, leaving nothing but ash and silence in their wake. Every civilized species in the galaxy knew what was coming. Everyone except the humans, apparently. HFY's 4 eyes tracked the data streams flowing across the tactical display. The Velkin Empire had committed their entire Third Fleet. The Crystalline Shard Collective was contributing their devastating energy matrices. Even the reclusive deep swimmers had emerged from their ocean worlds to offer aid. Yet the human delegation sat quietly in the corner, a single representative in a simple military uniform, saying nothing. The human was small by galactic standards, barely reaching HFY's chest. Her hair was an unremarkable brown, her skin a pale tan color that seemed almost translucent under the station's artificial lighting. What struck HFY most was how calm she appeared. While representatives from other species gestured frantically, their voices rising in pitch as they detailed the horrors they had witnessed, the human simply sat and listened. "The Crimson Horde moves like a plague," the Velkin ambassador was saying, his scaled hands trembling as he spoke. "They do not simply conquer worlds, they consume them. We found the remains of Proxima Colony last week. The entire population, 7 billion souls, had been processed into biomass. The Horde does not take prisoners, does not negotiate, does not show mercy." Murmurs of fear rippled through the assembled delegates. HFY had seen the footage from Proxima Colony himself. The images still haunted his dreams. The Shard Collective's crystal form chimed with harmonics that translated roughly to profound sadness. "Our mathematical projections indicate a 12.7% survival probability for galactic civilization if current trends continue. The Horde's expansion rate is accelerating. We estimate 4 months until they reach the core worlds. 4 months. HFY felt his secondary heart skip a beat. His own homeworld of Alteria was located in the core worlds, home to over 30 billion of his people. The thought of them being processed into biomass made his stomach acid burn. "What forces can you commit, honored delegates?" asked Admiral Chentar, the Altarian fleet commander overseeing the meeting. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority, but HFY could detect the underlying current of fear. The responses came quickly. The Velkins could deploy 847 ships immediately, with another 200 following within the week. The Shard Collective's 12 world ships would form the defensive backbone. The deep swimmers pledged their unique underwater assault capabilities. When the Admiral's gaze fell upon the human representative, the room fell silent. She stood slowly, her movements precise but unhurried. "I am Colonel Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite its quiet tone. "Earth pledges full military support to the Alliance." Admiral Chentar's mandibles clicked together in what HFY recognized as confusion. "And what does that support consist of, Colonel? How many ships can Terra contribute?" The human's expression didn't change. 7. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the Velkin ambassador burst into what could only be described as hysterical laughter. "7 ships? 7? We are facing a force that has consumed entire star systems, and humanity offers 7 ships? Colonel Chen remained perfectly calm. "That is correct." HFY found himself studying the human more intently. There was something in her posture, something in the way she held herself, that suggested she was not embarrassed by this seemingly pathetic contribution. If anything, she seemed confident. "Perhaps," the Shard Collective chimed diplomatically, "humanity prefers to contribute in other ways? Logistics? Medical support?" "No," Colonel Chen replied. 7 warships. Full combat deployment." The Velkin ambassador had stopped laughing and was now staring at the human with open incredulity. "Do you not understand the scope of this threat? The Crimson Horde has destroyed fleets numbering in the thousands. What possible difference could 7 ships make?" For the first time since the meeting began, Colonel Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "You'll see." The meeting continued for another 3 hours, but HFY found his attention repeatedly drawn back to the human colonel. She contributed little to the tactical discussions, offering only brief confirmations when directly addressed. Yet she never seemed concerned, never showed the slightest hint of the fear that was eating away at every other delegate in the room. When the meeting finally adjourned, HFY made a decision that would change the course of his life. He approached Colonel Chen as she gathered her materials. "Colonel," he said, inclining his head in the formal Alterian greeting, "I am Commander HFY of the Alterian Defense Corps. I was wondering if I might speak with you privately." The human looked up at him with dark brown eyes that seemed to hold depths he couldn't fathom.
"Of course, Commander."
"What's on your mind?" They walked to an observation deck overlooking the station's docking bays. Through the transparent aluminum windows, they could see the gathering fleet. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species, all preparing for what many believed would be the last battle for galactic civilization. "I do not understand," HFY said finally. "Your species offers 7 ships against a force that has conquered half the galaxy. Either humanity possesses weapons beyond our comprehension, or your leadership has made a grave miscalculation." Colonel Chen was quiet for a long moment, watching the ships through the window. "Tell me, Commander," she said eventually, "what do you know about Earth's history?" "Very little," HFY admitted. "Humanity is a relatively new member of the galactic community. Your species only achieved faster-than-light travel 60 years ago." 63 years, the colonel corrected, "and in that time we've been busy learning about the galaxy, about the various species, their capabilities, their weaknesses." She paused. "Their fears." Something in the way she said that last word made HFY's skin crawl. "Their fears." Colonel Chen turned to face him fully. In the dim lighting of the observation deck, her features seemed sharper, more predatory. "The galaxy is old, Commander. Most species reached space travel millennia ago. They've had time to develop sophisticated civilizations, complex technologies, beautiful art and literature. They've also had time to become comfortable. Comfortable, safe, predictable. Wars, when they happen at all, are conducted according to established rules. Territory is exchanged, treaties are signed, prisoners are treated humanely. The galaxy has learned to fight civilized wars." HFY nodded. This was true enough. Galactic conflicts were typically resolved through limited engagements and diplomatic negotiations. The idea of total warfare, of complete annihilation, was considered barbaric by most species. "The Crimson Horde changed that," Colonel Chen continued. "They brought something the galaxy hasn't seen in thousands of years. True existential threat. The kind of enemy that doesn't follow rules, doesn't negotiate, doesn't show mercy." She smiled that unsettling smile again. "The galaxy is terrified because it's forgotten how to fight a war where survival is the only victory condition. And humanity remembers?" The colonel's laugh was soft, but there was something cold in it. "Commander, Earth is a young world. We only reached space 63 years ago. Do you know what we were doing before that?" HFY shook his head. "We were killing each other. For resources, for territory, for ideologies, for religions, sometimes just because we were bored. We've fought wars with swords and arrows, with gunpowder and bullets, with atomic fire and chemical death. We've conquered continents and burned cities to the ground. We've committed genocides that make the Crimson Horde look like amateurs." The temperature in the observation deck seemed to drop several degrees. HFY found himself taking an unconscious step backward. "And the most important thing," Colonel Chen continued, her voice never rising above a conversational tone, "is that we're really, really good at it. You're saying that humanity... I'm saying that while the galaxy spent 10,000 years learning to be civilized, we spent those same years learning to be very effective killers. We've had 63 years of peace, Commander. Just 63 years. Do you know how long it takes for a species to forget how to wage total war?" HFY was beginning to understand, and the understanding filled him with a mixture of hope and terror. "Longer than 63 years. Much longer." Colonel Chen turned back to the window, watching the assembled fleet. "The Crimson Horde thinks they're bringing something new to the galaxy, something shocking and terrible. They think they're the apex predators." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "They're about to learn they're wrong. The next day brought news that chilled the blood of every delegate on the station. Long-range sensors had detected a massive horde fleet approaching the Centauri system, home to over 15 billion sentient beings. The enemy would arrive in less than 72 hours. The Alliance fleet scrambled to respond. Over 800 ships representing the finest military technology the galaxy could offer began the jump to Centauri. As Zeph-Hai prepared his own vessel for departure, he received an unexpected communication. "Commander," Colonel Chen's voice came through the comm system. "I have a proposition for you." Zeph-Hai was strapping himself into his command chair aboard the Alterian destroyer Righteous Fury. "What kind of proposition, Colonel?" "Transfer to one of our ships. Serve as a liaison officer during the battle." The request was highly irregular. Interspecies transfers were rare and typically required months of paperwork and preparation. "I'm not sure that's possible on such short notice, Colonel. I've already cleared it with Admiral Chentar. He agrees that closer cooperation between our forces would be beneficial." There was a pause. "I think you should see what we're capable of, Commander." "I think someone needs to witness it and remember." Something in her tone made Zeph-Hai's blood run cold again. But curiosity won out over caution. "Which ship?" "The Indomitable. She's our flagship. Transfer shuttles are already en route to your position." 20 minutes later, Zeph-Hai found himself aboard a human vessel for the first time. The differences were immediately apparent. Where Alterian ships were designed with flowing organic curves that reflected their aquatic evolution, human ships were angular and brutal. Everything was armored, redundant, built to take damage and keep fighting. The Indomitable was larger than he had expected, easily the size of an Alterian heavy cruiser, but something about its design suggested it was built for a different kind of warfare than anything the galaxy was accustomed to. Colonel Chen met him at the docking bay. "Welcome aboard, Commander. I'm afraid we'll have to begin our jump sequence immediately. Time is running short." As they made their way through the ship's corridors, Zeph-Hai noticed more differences. The human crew moved with a disciplined efficiency he had rarely seen. There was no wasted motion, no casual conversation. Everyone knew their job and did it with quiet competence. "How many crew?" he asked. 800, Chen replied. "We run a tight ship." They arrived at the bridge, and Zeph-Hai got his first good look at human military technology in action. The displays were crisp and functional, providing maximum information with minimum clutter. But what struck him most was the atmosphere. The bridge crew worked in near silence, communicating through brief, coded phrases that conveyed maximum meaning in minimum time. "Jump in 30 seconds, announced the navigation officer. "All stations report ready," came the response from various positions around the bridge. "Engineering shows green across all boards. Weapons systems nominal." Colonel Chen settled into the captain's chair with easy authority. "Execute jump." The sensation of FTL travel was different aboard a human ship. Smoother somehow, as if their technology was more refined than it appeared. Zeph-Hai found himself wondering what other surprises humanity might have in store. Jump complete. Centauri system, outer orbit. Tactical, give me a full sweep. The main display flickered to life, showing the Centauri system in three-dimensional detail. Zeph-Hai's four eyes widened as he took in the scope of what they faced. The Crimson Horde fleet was massive. Over 2,000 ships of various sizes, from small fighters to enormous dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the Alliance fleet. They were arranged in a perfect sphere around Centauri Prime, beginning the systematic bombardment that would reduce the planet's surface to molten slag before the real harvesting began. "Alliance fleet positions?" Colonel Chen asked calmly. 847 ships, arranged in standard battle formation. They're holding position at the edge of the gravity well, probably trying to determine the best approach vector. Zeph-Hai studied the tactical display with growing dread. The Alliance was outnumbered more than 2-1, and the Crimson Horde had the advantage of position. Any attack would have to punch through layers of defensive fire from an entrenched enemy. "Where are the other human ships?" he asked. Colonel Chen smiled that cold smile again. "They'll be along shortly. Tell me, Commander, what's the standard Alliance doctrine for this type of engagement?" Zeph-Hai considered the question. "Coordinated assault. Concentrate firepower on weak points in the enemy formation. Break through and engage their capital ships directly. Minimize civilian casualties by drawing the battle away from populated areas. Textbook approach. Very civilized. The colonel touched a control on her chair. Communications, patch me through to Admiral Chentar. The Admiral's image appeared on the main screen moments later. His expression was grim. Colonel Chen, we're facing a significant tactical challenge. The enemy has superior numbers and position. I'm considering a fighting withdrawal to draw them away from the planet. Negative, Admiral. Continue with your original plan. Begin your attack in exactly 18 minutes. 18 minutes, Colonel? We need more time to coordinate. 18 minutes, Admiral. Trust me. The communication ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Zeph stared at Colonel Chen in disbelief. You just ordered the Alliance fleet into a suicide attack. Did I? The colonel seemed genuinely puzzled by his concern. Tactical, update me on Horde fleet disposition. No change, ma'am. They're maintaining defensive posture around the planet. Looks like they're confident in their position. Of course they are. They've never faced anything like this before. Colonel Chen stood and walked to the tactical display, studying the enemy formation with the intensity of a predator selecting prey. Commander Zeph, tell me what you see when you look at that fleet. Zeph joined her at the display. I see an overwhelming force in an unassailable position. Interesting. I see a target-rich environment and an enemy that's about to learn why humanity spent so many years perfecting the art of war. Before Zeph could ask what she meant, alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. Multiple jump signatures. The sensor operator called out, 6 ships, human configuration, coming in fast. There they are, Colonel Chen said with satisfaction. Right on schedule. The 6 new human ships materialized not at the edge of the system like conventional military doctrine demanded, but deep inside the Crimson Horde formation. They appeared simultaneously, in perfect coordination, their positions calculated to create maximum chaos and confusion. How? Zeph gasped. How did they jump so close to the enemy? The gravitational interference alone should have made that impossible. Human engineering, Colonel Chen replied simply. We've had to get creative over the years. What happened next defied everything Zeph thought he knew about space combat. Instead of immediately engaging the nearest enemy ships, the 6 human vessels began moving in a complex pattern that seemed almost choreographed. They wove between Horde ships like dancers, their weapon systems silent. Why aren't they firing? Zeph demanded. Patience, Commander. Watch and learn. The Crimson Horde fleet was beginning to react to the unexpected intrusion. Ships broke formation, turning to engage the human vessels that had appeared in their midst. The perfect defensive spear began to distort as hundreds of ships adjusted their positions, and that was when the real attack began. All ships, Colonel Chen announced calmly, execute Protocol Omega. The 7 human ships suddenly erupted into coordinated violence unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. But they weren't targeting the Horde warships. Instead, they were firing on something else entirely. Zeph watched in horror and fascination as the human weapons tore into the Crimson Horde's logistics vessels. Supply ships, fuel depots, command and control platforms. All the unglamorous but vital infrastructure that kept a fleet operational. The targets that civilized species usually ignored in battle, considering them off-limits by unspoken agreement. You're targeting non-combatants, Zeph whispered. We're targeting military assets, Colonel Chen corrected. Every one of those ships is part of their war machine. Every fuel depot we destroy limits their operational range. Every command ship we eliminate disrupts their coordination. The human attack was devastating in its efficiency. While the Horde fleet scrambled to respond to threats that appeared and disappeared like ghosts, their entire logistical network was being systematically dismantled. Ships that had been confident in their invincibility suddenly found themselves cut off from fuel, ammunition, and orders. But that was just the beginning. Alliance fleet is beginning their attack, the sensor operator reported. Admiral Chentar's forces, their timing coordinated to the second, struck the Crimson Horde formation at its weakest point. The enemy ships, already disorganized by the human raid on their logistics network, were caught between two forces attacking with completely different doctrines. The Alliance fought, as they always had, honorably, efficiently, targeting enemy warships in formal engagement. But the humans continued their systematic destruction of everything that made the Horde fleet effective. Communications arrays, sensor platforms, manufacturing ships, all vanishing under precisely targeted fire. "This is barbaric," HFY said, though he couldn't keep the awe out of his voice. "This is war," Colonel Chen replied. "Real war, not the civilized limited conflicts your people are used to, but the kind of total warfare that determines the survival of entire species." As if to emphasize her point, the Crimson Horde fleet was beginning to show signs of systemic collapse. Cut off from their command structure and running low on fuel and ammunition, individual ships began to break away from the main formation. Some attempted to retreat. Others, in growing desperation, began targeting the human vessels with increasingly wild and inaccurate fire. "Enemy fleet cohesion is breaking down," the tactical officer reported with professional satisfaction. "Estimate 40% of their logistics network has been eliminated." "And their morale?" Colonel Chen asked. "Hard to read, ma'am, but their communications traffic suggests significant confusion and fear." HFY realized that this was what Colonel Chen had been talking about. The Crimson Horde had brought terror to the galaxy, but they had never experienced it themselves. They were discovering what it felt like to be hunted by something more dangerous than they were. The battle continued for another 6 hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt after the first 30 minutes. The Crimson Horde, cut off from their support network and facing enemies who fought with a ruthlessness they had never encountered, began a full retreat. Many ships never made it out of the system. When it was over, HFY stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, staring at the tactical display in shocked silence. The Alliance had achieved total victory with minimal losses. The Crimson Horde, the unstoppable force that had consumed 17 star systems, had been broken in a single engagement. "How?" he asked finally. Colonel Chen was reviewing casualty reports, her expression as calm as ever. "Simple, Commander. We fought the kind of war we're good at. Total war. No rules, no mercy, no civilized limitations. We identified their weaknesses and exploited them without hesitation. But the logistics ships, the supply lines, those are legitimate military targets, but no one attacks them in battle. It's considered unsporting?" Colonel Chen looked up from her reports. "Commander, when the survival of your species is at stake, sporting considerations become irrelevant. The Crimson Horde came to this galaxy bringing total war. They just discovered that they weren't very good at it." HFY was beginning to understand. "You've been planning this. Not just the battle, but the entire war. You've been studying the Horde, learning their tactics, their weaknesses, for 6 months," the colonel confirmed. "Ever since they first appeared, while the galaxy was trying to figure out how to fight them conventionally, we were developing new doctrines specifically designed to counter their methods." "And the other species? The Alliance?" Colonel Chen's expression softened slightly. "They're good people, Commander. Honorable, civilized, everything we aspire to be. But they've forgotten how to be monsters when monsters are what the situation requires." She stood and walked to the view screen, looking out at the debris field that had once been a Crimson Horde fleet. "Humanity hasn't forgotten. We've been monsters for most of our history. Sometimes being a monster is exactly what the universe needs." As they prepared to jump back to the staging area, HFY found himself grappling with a terrifying realization. The galaxy had been saved, but it had been saved by something that might be just as dangerous as what it had replaced. Humanity had revealed itself to be the apex predator the galaxy had never known it needed to fear. The victory celebration at Centauri Station felt hollow to Commander HFY. Around him, delegates from across the galaxy raised glasses of various intoxicants, their voices loud with relief and triumph. The Crimson Horde had been broken, their retreat confirmed by long-range sensors. The immediate threat to galactic civilization had ended, yet HFY found himself unable to join in the festivities. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the systematic destruction of the Horde logistics network, the cold efficiency with which the human fleet had dismantled an enemy that had terrorized half the galaxy. The other Alliance species celebrated their victory, but they didn't truly understand what they had witnessed. Colonel Chen stood at the observation deck's far end, alone despite the crowded room. She held a small glass of what appeared to be water, occasionally taking tiny sips while watching the fleet traffic through the massive windows. Her expression was unreadable, showing neither satisfaction nor regret. Zephe approached her, his footsteps echoing softly on the metal decking. "You're not celebrating. Should I be?" She didn't turn to look at him, her gaze fixed on the ships moving through space outside. "We won a battle, Commander. The war is far from over. The Crimson Horde is retreating. Intelligence reports suggest their remaining forces are scattered across 3 systems no longer capable of coordinated assault. For now." Colonel Chen finally looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the station lights. "Tell me, what do you know about Earth's military history during our pre-space era?" Zephe had spent much of the past week researching human history, driven by a combination of curiosity and growing unease. "Your species fought constant conflicts, tribal warfare, nation-state confrontations, 2 global wars that devastated your planet. And what did we learn from all that fighting?" The question seemed simple, but Zephe suspected there were layers he wasn't seeing. Military tactics? Weapons development? Strategic planning? Colonel Chen's smile was tired rather than cold this time. "We learned that winning a battle is easy. Winning a war requires something else entirely." She gestured toward the celebrating crowd. "Look at them. They think the threat is over because we bloodied the Horde's nose. Isn't it? Our intelligence estimates suggest." "Your intelligence estimates are based on conventional warfare analysis." Chen interrupted. "The Crimson Horde isn't conventional. They're a collective organism driven by expansion and consumption. Defeating a single fleet doesn't eliminate them any more than cutting off a limb kills a starfish." Zephe felt a chill run through his nervous system. "You're saying they'll return. I'm saying they're already adapting. Right now, in whatever systems they've retreated to, they're analyzing what happened at Centauri. They're studying our tactics, our weapons, our coordination. When they return, they'll be ready for what we did to them." "Then what do we do?" Colonel Chen drained her glass and set it on a nearby table. "We make sure we're ready for what they haven't seen yet." The next morning brought a flurry of activity as the Alliance fleet prepared to disperse back to their home systems. The immediate crisis was over, and most species were eager to return to normal operations. Zephe was scheduled to transfer back to the Righteous Fury within hours, but found himself reluctant to leave. He had submitted a formal request to Admiral Chentar for extended assignment with the human fleet. The response had been swift and negative. Alterian Command wanted their officers back where they belonged, not gallivanting around with alien crews learning questionable tactics. "They're afraid," Colonel Chen said when he mentioned the refusal. They were standing in the Indomitable's armory, where she had been reviewing weapon specifications with her senior staff. "Afraid of what?" "Of what you might learn. Of what you might bring back." She gestured to the weapons around them. "These aren't the most advanced energy weapons in the galaxy. The Shard Collective's crystalline arrays put out more raw power. The Velkan plasma cannons have better range, but these weapons were designed for a different kind of war." Zephe examined the human weapons more closely. They were robust, reliable, designed for sustained combat rather than brief engagements. More importantly, they were modular. Every component could be quickly replaced or modified in the field. "Your weapons are built for extended campaigns. Our everything is built for extended campaigns," Chen corrected. "Our ships, our logistics, our training, our entire military philosophy. We don't fight battles, Commander. We fight wars. The Alliance fights wars too. The Centauri conflict lasted 18 months. The Centauri conflict was a border dispute with negotiated ceasefires and humanitarian corridors. We're talking about something completely different." Colonel Chen picked up one of the sidearms from the display rack, checking its charge level with practiced efficiency. "How many wars has Alteria fought in the past century?" Zephe considered the question. 3 major conflicts, several minor territorial disputes. Duration? The longest lasted 2 years. Most were resolved within months. Casualties? The Kepler border war resulted in approximately 50,000 military deaths, considered the highest in recent Alterian history. Colonel Chen nodded, setting the weapon back in its rack. Earth's second global war lasted 6 years and killed approximately 75 million people. Our civil war lasted 4 years and killed over 600,000. We fought conflicts that lasted decades, consuming entire generations. The numbers were staggering. HFY struggled to comprehend warfare on such a scale. Your species nearly destroyed itself. Multiple times. We've come within hours of complete nuclear annihilation on at least 3 occasions. We've poisoned our own atmosphere, devastated entire continents, turned orbital space into a debris field. Her expression grew distant. And through it all, we kept learning, kept adapting, kept getting better at the art of making war. That's monstrous. Yes, Colonel Chen agreed simply. It is, but when monsters threaten your existence, sometimes you need monsters of your own. A communication alert interrupted their conversation. The bridge was calling Colonel Chen for an urgent briefing. As they made their way through the ship's corridors, HFY noticed increased activity. Crew members were moving with purposeful haste, and several sections that had been opened during his previous visits were now sealed. The bridge buzzed with tension when they arrived. Officers clustered around displays showing tactical data from across the galaxy. The celebratory atmosphere from the previous evening had evaporated completely. "Report," Colonel Chen ordered as she took her command chair. "Long-range sensor data from the outer rim, ma'am," the intelligence officer replied. "The Horde remnants aren't retreating randomly. They're consolidating." The main display shifted to show a star chart covering nearly a quarter of the galaxy. Red indicators marked confirmed Crimson Horde positions, while orange zones showed areas of suspected activity. Instead of the scattered, disorganized retreat everyone had expected, the patterns showed deliberate movement toward specific systems. "How many ships?" Chen asked. "Estimated 1,200 vessels, possibly more. They're gathering in the Void Nebula, beyond our normal patrol routes." HFY studied the display with growing alarm. "That's twice the force we faced at Centauri. And they've had time to analyze our tactics," Colonel Chen observed. "They know our capabilities now, our coordination methods, our preferred targets." She leaned forward in her chair. "What's our current fleet disposition?" "The Alliance fleet has dispersed. Most member species have returned their vessels to home systems for maintenance and crew rotation. Total available forces in the region number approximately 300 ships." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. The Crimson Horde had reorganized with superior numbers, while the Alliance had scattered its forces. When they returned, the defenders would be outnumbered 4-1. "Recommendations?" Chen asked. "Immediate recall of all Alliance vessels," the tactical officer suggested. "Full mobilization across all member systems. Timeline for full fleet assembly? Minimum 3 weeks, assuming no delays." Colonel Chen shook her head. "They won't give us 3 weeks. If they're smart, they'll strike within days, before we can coordinate a proper response." She turned to the communications officer. "Send a priority message to Earth Command. Request immediate deployment of the reserve fleet." The reserve fleet? HFY had never heard humans mention reserve forces. "How many ships?" "Enough," Chen replied cryptically. "But first we need to buy them time to arrive." The next few hours blurred together in a haze of tactical planning and strategic discussion. Colonel Chen had called together the senior officers from all 7 human ships still in the region, along with whatever Alliance representatives remained at Centauri Station. The humans dominated the meeting despite being vastly outnumbered, their quiet competence somehow making everyone else seem less prepared. "The situation is clear," Admiral Chentar was saying. "We cannot match their numbers with conventional forces. Our only option is to delay their advance until reinforcements arrive. Delaying actions require strong defensive positions," the Velkin representative pointed out. "The Void Nebula approaches through open space. There's nowhere to make a stand." "Unless we create one," Colonel Chen said quietly. All eyes turned to her. She was studying a 3-dimensional hologram of the local star systems, her fingers tracing possible approach routes. "Explain," Admiral Chentar commanded. The Horde expects us to defend fixed positions, planets, stations, strategic resources. They'll plan their advance accordingly, expecting us to fall back from system to system until we can gather enough force to make a stand. That's standard defensive doctrine, the Shard Collective representative chimed. Standard doctrine gets you predictable results. We need them to think they're fighting the same kind of war they've been planning for. Colonel Chen manipulated the hologram, highlighting specific star systems. Instead, we're going to fight a different war entirely. What kind of war? HFY asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The kind we're good at. Total war. No sanctuary, no safe areas, no rules. Her expression hardened. We're going to teach the Crimson Horde what it means to fight humanity. The plan that emerged from the briefing was unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of defending fixed positions, the human ships would operate as independent raiders, striking at Horde forces wherever they found them. No target would be off limits. Supply lines, communication relays, staging areas, even civilian population centers that had been converted to support the Horde war effort. You're talking about terrorism, Admiral Chentar said, his voice heavy with distaste. I'm talking about asymmetric warfare, Colonel Chen corrected. When you're outnumbered and outgunned, you don't fight on the enemy's terms. You change the rules. The galactic community will never accept such methods. The galactic community will never need to know the details. They'll see the results. Horde forces delayed, confused, and demoralized while Alliance reinforcements gather. Chen stood and walked to the display. Look, Admiral, I understand your concerns. These methods violate every convention of civilized warfare, but we're not fighting a civilized enemy. Admiral Chentar was quiet for a long moment, his mandibles clicking softly as he considered. Finally, he spoke. What do you need? Complete operational freedom for human forces. No oversight, no reporting requirements, no restrictions on targeting. Let us fight the way we know how. And if I refuse? Colonel Chen's smile returned, cold and predatory. Then you'll fight a conventional defensive campaign against superior numbers and lose. The Crimson Horde will overrun your positions, consume your populations, and continue their expansion across the galaxy. She paused. Unless, of course, you prefer that outcome. The alliance with humanity was formalized within hours. It wasn't a partnership, so much as a surrender of moral authority. An acknowledgement that sometimes civilization needed to employ uncivilized methods to survive. HFY found himself assigned as the official liaison, despite his earlier request for transfer being denied. Admiral Chentar wanted someone monitoring human operations, someone who could report on their methods if questions arose later. As the Indomitable prepared to depart Centauri Station, HFY stood on the bridge watching the final preparations. The ship's crew moved with the same quiet efficiency he had observed before, but there was a new edge to their movements. They were preparing for a different kind of war, one that would push them back toward the savage ancestors they had tried so hard to leave behind. Second thoughts, Commander? Colonel Chen asked, joining him at the tactical display. Many thoughts, he admitted. I've spent my entire career believing in the principles of honorable combat, limited warfare, protection of civilians, respect for surrendered enemies. Everything you're planning violates those principles. Yes, she agreed. It does. So why do I find myself hoping you succeed? Because you understand what's at stake. The Crimson Horde doesn't respect your principles, Commander. They see them as weaknesses to be exploited. Honorable enemies deserve honorable treatment. Monsters deserve to be fought with monstrous methods. The ship's intercom crackled to life. All stations report ready for departure. Jump coordinates locked in. Very well, Colonel Chen replied. Take us out. As the Indomitable engaged its faster-than-light drive, HFY caught a glimpse of the destination on the navigation display. They weren't heading toward the Void Nebula where the Horde was gathering. Instead, they were jumping to the Kepler Corridor, a major trade route that the enemy would need to secure their supply lines. We're not going after their main fleet? Not yet. First, we're going to make them afraid to leave it. Colonel Chen settled into her command chair with the easy confidence of a born predator. By the time we're finished, the Crimson Horde will discover that there's no such thing as a safe position when you're fighting humanity. The jump to the Kepler corridor took 14 hours. During that time, HFY observed the human crew preparing for their upcoming operations. What struck him most was the methodical nature of their preparations. Everything was checked, double-checked, and verified. Weapons were tested, equipment was serviced, and contingency plans were developed for dozens of possible scenarios. But it was the psychological preparation that disturbed him most. The crew wasn't just getting ready for battle, they were preparing to become something else, something harder, more ruthless, more willing to do whatever was necessary to achieve victory. It's a process, Colonel Chen explained when he mentioned his observations. Humans are capable of great compassion and terrible cruelty, sometimes simultaneously. In peacetime, we emphasize our better nature. In wartime, we cultivate our darker impulses. How do you go back? When the war is over, how do you return to being the people you were before? The question seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, her composed facade cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "Sometimes you don't," she said quietly. "Sometimes the things you do in war change you permanently. That's part of the cost. And you're willing to pay that cost? I'm willing to pay any cost to ensure my species survives. The question is whether the galaxy will be grateful for our sacrifice or horrified by our methods." She looked at him directly. "What do you think, Commander? When this is over and the Horde is defeated, will the Alliance remember us as heroes or monsters?" Zephi didn't have an answer. He was beginning to suspect that both descriptions might be equally accurate. The Kepler Corridor was one of the busiest trade routes in this sector of the galaxy. Under normal circumstances, it would be filled with merchant vessels, passenger liners, and escort ships from a dozen different species. Now it was eerily quiet, most civilian traffic having been suspended due to the Horde threat, which made the convoy they detected even more significant. "Contact on long-range sensors," the tactical officer reported. 15 vessels, Crimson Horde configuration, mixed composition, looks like supply ships with escort destroyers. Colonel Chen studied the tactical display with predatory interest. Perfect. A nice, soft target to start with. She turned to Zephi. "This is your last chance to transfer to an observation shuttle, Commander. What we're about to do won't be pleasant to watch. I'll stay. Your choice. Just remember that you asked to be here." She activated the ship's communication system. "All hands, this is the captain. We are about to engage enemy forces. This will not be a conventional battle. We are going to teach these creatures what it means to threaten humanity. All crew members not essential to combat operations should secure themselves in designated safe areas. This is going to get rough." The attack began with a deception that violated every principle of honorable warfare Zephi had ever learned. Instead of announcing their presence and demanding surrender, as galactic law required, the Indomitable approached the convoy while broadcasting the identification codes of a friendly merchant vessel. "They're responding to our hail," the communications officer reported. "They think we're the cargo hauler Prosperity's dream. Maintain the deception until we're in optimal firing position," Chen ordered. "I want them to feel safe right up until the moment they die." The convoy maintained course, showing no signs of alarm. Why would they? According to their sensors, they were being approached by a harmless trade ship, probably seeking information about safe routing through the sector. "Optimal firing range in 30 seconds, the weapons officer announced. "Target selection? All escort vessels marked for immediate destruction. Supply ships will be disabled and boarded." "Why board them?" Zephi asked. "Why not simply destroy everything?" Colonel Chen's smile was arctic. "Because we need to send a message. And messages require messengers. When the attack came, it was devastating in its suddenness. One moment, the Horde convoy was proceeding peacefully through space. The next, their escort vessels were exploding under concentrated fire from weapons that shouldn't have existed. The human ship had revealed itself like a predator dropping its camouflage, all pretense of peaceful intent vanishing in an instant. Its weapon systems were unlike anything Zephi had seen before, not the elegant energy beams favored by most galactic civilizations, but something more primitive and infinitely more terrifying. "Kinetic impactors," Colonel Chen explained as she watched the destruction unfold, "accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. No energy signature to detect, no shields that can stop them, no way to defend except to not be where they're aimed. The escort destroyers died without ever understanding what had killed them. Their shields were designed to deflect energy weapons, not solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The impacts released energy equivalent to nuclear detonations, turning sophisticated warships into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. Within minutes, the convoy's military protection had been completely eliminated. The supply ships, their engines disabled by precisely targeted strikes, drifted helplessly in space. "Boarding pods away," the tactical officer reported. "Boarding? We're taking prisoners?" "Not prisoners," Colonel Chen corrected. "Witnesses." The boarding operation was swift and ruthless. Human Marines in powered armor cut through the supply ships' hulls, overwhelming the small security crews with overwhelming firepower and terrifying efficiency. Within an hour, all 5 supply vessels had been captured. But it was what happened next that truly disturbed HFY. The humans didn't just take the cargo. They cataloged everything, analyzed the shipping manifests, traced supply routes and distribution networks. They interrogated the surviving crew members with methods that skirted the edges of galactic law, extracting information about horde logistics and strategic planning. And then they did something that no civilized species would have considered. "Load the survivors onto the fastest ship," Colonel Chen ordered. "Give them minimal life support and just enough fuel to reach horde space. Then disable their weapons and communications. You're sending them back? I'm sending a message. I want them to tell their superiors exactly what happened here. I want them to describe how helpless they felt, how quickly their escorts died, how easily we took everything they valued." Her expression was stone. "Fear is a weapon, Commander. Sometimes it's more effective than any gun." As they watched the damaged ship limp away into hyperspace, HFY found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. The tactical victory had been complete. The Horde convoy was eliminated, valuable intelligence was gathered, and enemy morale would be damaged. But the methods used— "This is what we meant when we said we were good at war," Colonel Chen said quietly. "Not just the shooting and killing, though we excel at that too, but the psychological dimension, the strategic thinking, the willingness to do whatever is necessary to achieve victory." She turned to face him. "Are you beginning to understand why the galaxy should be afraid of us?" HFY nodded slowly. "You're not just better at fighting. You're better at the entire concept of warfare. 50,000 years of evolution shaped us on a world where everything was trying to kill us. 10,000 years of history taught us to kill each other, more efficiently than anyone else in the galaxy. 63 years of peace gave us perspective on what we're capable of when pushed." Colonel Chen looked out at the debris field that had once been a Crimson Horde convoy. "The galaxy spent millennia learning to be civilized. We spent the same time learning to be effective. When civilization faces extinction, effectiveness matters more." The communication system chimed with an incoming message from Earth Command. Colonel Chen listened to the encrypted transmission with an expression that grew progressively grimmer. "What is it?" HFY asked when the message ended. "The reserve fleet deployment has been delayed. Political complications back on Earth. Some members of our government have concerns about the methods we're employing out here. How long of a delay? Unknown. Could be days, could be weeks." She stood and began pacing the bridge, her calm facade finally showing cracks. "Meanwhile, our intelligence suggests the Horde will begin their next offensive within 48 hours. What do we do?" Colonel Chen stopped pacing and looked at him with eyes that had gone completely cold. "We do what humans do when our backs are against the wall, Commander. We stop fighting like civilized beings and start fighting like the monsters we've always been capable of becoming." The transformation was immediate and terrifying. Orders went out to the other human vessels scattered throughout the region, implementing contingency plans that had been developed in secret. The gloves were coming off, and HFY was about to learn what humanity looked like when it stopped pretending to be civilized. The transformation began with silence. Commander HFY noticed it first during the morning briefing. The usual background chatter of human crew members had vanished, replaced by an efficiency so absolute it bordered on the mechanical. Officers spoke only when necessary, using clipped phrases that conveyed maximum information with minimum words. Even their movements had changed, becoming more deliberate, more economical. Colonel Chen stood at the center of the bridge, studying intelligence reports from across the sector. The data painted a grim picture. The Crimson Horde was mobilizing faster than anticipated, their advanced scouts already probing the outer defense networks. Within hours, the main assault would begin. "Status report," she ordered, her voice carrying a new edge that made HFY's scales prickle. "All human vessels report ready for Protocol 7, the communications officer replied. "Targets have been identified and assigned." "Alliance coordination?" "Admiral Chentar's forces are establishing defensive positions around Kepler Prime." "Standard formation, concentrated firepower, prepared to conduct fighting withdrawal if necessary." Colonel Chen nodded, but HFY could see the frustration in her posture. The Alliance was still thinking in terms of conventional warfare, even after everything they had witnessed. "And our other preparations?" "Complete, ma'am. All assets are in position." HFY had no idea what assets they were referring to. Over the past 18 hours, human ships had been moving throughout the sector, but their destinations and purposes remained classified above his clearance level. Whatever they were planning, it was bigger than the convoy raid. "Very well. Execute Protocol 7 on my mark." Colonel Chen turned to HFY, and for a moment, he saw something almost like regret in her eyes. "Commander, I strongly recommend you transfer to the observation pod. What we're about to do, I'm staying. Then you need to understand something. What you've seen so far, the convoy raid, the boarding operations, that was us being restrained. That was us trying to fight a civilized war with uncivilized methods." She paused, her expression hardening. "We're done being restrained." The first indication of what she meant came from the sensor displays. Across the sector, human ships were moving into positions that made no tactical sense according to conventional doctrine. Instead of concentrating their forces for maximum firepower, they were spreading out, placing themselves at seemingly random points throughout the region. "I don't understand the deployment pattern," HFY said, studying the tactical display. "You're thinking like a soldier," Colonel Chen replied. "Think like a terrorist." Before he could ask what she meant, the first phase of the operation began. "Horde advance elements detected," the sensor operator announced. 12 ships, scouting formation approaching the Kepler system. "Acknowledged. Initiate contact." What followed defied every principle of space combat HFY had ever learned. Instead of engaging the Horde scouts directly, the human ships began broadcasting on all frequencies simultaneously. Not military communications or demands for surrender, but something far more disturbing. They were broadcasting recordings. "What is this?" HFY asked, listening to the audio feeds with growing horror. "Psychological warfare," Colonel Chen replied calmly. "Those are recordings we made during the convoy boarding operations. The crew members we interrogated, the survivors we sent home. We recorded everything. The broadcasts were devastating in their psychological impact. Horde crew members could hear their own people describing the terror of being hunted by humans, the helplessness of watching their escorts die, the despair of knowing their enemies could strike anywhere at any time. But that was only the beginning. Mixed with the recordings were other sounds. Human war cries from their ancient past, the screams of dying enemies, the triumphant roars of victorious armies. All of it carefully edited and enhanced to create maximum psychological impact. "You're trying to frighten them." "We're succeeding in frightening them," Colonel Chen corrected. "Look at their formation." The Horde scouts had broken their precise military formation, their ships spreading out in defensive postures that suggested deep unease. Their communications traffic had increased exponentially, with frantic exchanges between vessels and desperate attempts to contact their main fleet. "They're afraid," HFY realized. They should be, because the broadcasts are just the beginning. Phase 2 commenced with surgical precision. Human ships that had been positioned at seemingly random points throughout the sector suddenly revealed their true purpose. They weren't positioned for combat. They were positioned to control every major hyperspace route in the region. "Hyperspace interdiction fields activated," the tactical officer reported. "The full coverage? Every jump point in the sector is now under our control. Nothing gets in or out without our permission." HFY stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The humans had effectively turned the entire Kepler sector into a prison. Any Horde forces that entered would be trapped, unable to retreat or call for reinforcements. This is impossible. Hyperspace interdiction on this scale would require massive energy expenditures, dozens of specialized ships, or Colonel Chen interrupted. A thorough understanding of hyperspace physics and a willingness to use methods that other species consider too dangerous. What methods? Instead of answering, she gestured to the main display, which now showed a detailed readout of the interdiction network. What Sci-Fi saw there made his blood run cold. The humans weren't using conventional interdiction fields. Instead, they had deployed a network of gravitational mines, devices that created localized space-time distortions. By manipulating matter at the quantum level, the technology was theoretically possible, but every civilized species had banned its development due to the catastrophic risks involved. You're weaponizing space itself, he whispered. We're using every available resource to ensure victory. The mines are precisely calibrated. They'll dissipate harmlessly after 72 hours if not maintained. But until then, this sector belongs to us. The psychological impact on the Horde scouts was immediate and devastating. Finding themselves trapped in a region of space controlled by an enemy that had just demonstrated capabilities they didn't know existed, several ships attempted immediate surrender. Others tried desperate escape maneuvers that only resulted in their destruction by the gravitational fields. But Colonel Chen wasn't interested in their surrender. All vessels, execute close-range interdiction. I want every Horde ship disabled and boarded. Ma'am, the communications officer hesitated. They're trying to surrender. I didn't ask for their surrender. I asked for their ships. What followed was a systematic capture operation that bordered on piracy. The 12 Horde scouts were disabled, one by one, their crews taken prisoner, their ships seized as prizes. But it was what the humans did with their captives that truly demonstrated how far they were willing to go. Set up interrogation centers on the captured vessels, Colonel Chen ordered. I want complete intelligence on Horde fleet disposition, command structure, supply lines, and strategic objectives. Use whatever methods are necessary. Ma'am, the Galactic Conventions on Prisoner Treatment don't apply to an enemy that's trying to exterminate all sentient life. Get me the information. Zeph watched the operation unfold with growing unease. The humans weren't just fighting a military campaign. They were conducting a comprehensive intelligence operation designed to strip away every secret the Horde possessed, and they were doing it with methods that violated every convention of civilized warfare. This is torture, he said finally. This is interrogation, Colonel Chen corrected. And it's providing invaluable intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions. The difference is academic. The difference is survival. Every piece of information we extract could save millions of lives when the main Horde fleet arrives. She turned to face him directly. Do you think your moral principles will matter to the dead, Commander? Before he could answer, the tactical alarm sounded. The main display shifted to show long-range sensor data from the edge of the sector. Multiple contacts, the sensor operator called out. Massive fleet formation approaching at high speed. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. The display showed a formation that dwarfed anything they had faced before. Over 2,000 Horde vessels arranged in a battle formation that spoke of careful planning and bitter experience. They had learned from their previous defeat and were coming prepared for the kind of warfare humanity had shown them. Fleet composition? Colonel Chen asked. Heavy on escorts and point defense platforms. They're expecting our kinetic impactor attacks. Also showing significant electronic warfare capabilities, they're probably planning to jam our communications and sensor systems. Adapt and overcome, Chen murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. They think they've figured us out. Haven't they? Zeph asked. They've figured out what we showed them. They have no idea what we've been holding in reserve. She activated the ship's communication system. All vessels, this is actual. Execute Protocol 9 immediately. Authorization code Omega-77. Protocol 9, it turned out, involved tactics that pushed the boundaries of physics and sanity in equal measure. The human ships began moving into formation patterns that seemed to make no sense until Zeph realized what they were attempting. Instead of preparing for conventional space combat, they were setting up what could only be described as a three-dimensional minefield. But these weren't conventional mines. Quantum resonance charges, Colonel Chen explained as she watched the deployment. They create localized instabilities in the quantum foam that underlies space-time. When a ship passes through the affected area, the instabilities cascade, releasing energy equivalent to a supernova in a very small space. That's insane. The risks are acceptable compared to the consequences of failure. Besides, we've been testing this technology for years. We know exactly how to control it. Years? How long have you been preparing for this kind of warfare? Since the day we first encountered other species and realized we weren't alone in the universe, Chen replied. Humanity's first instinct when meeting neighbors is to figure out how to fight them if necessary. It served us well. The quantum mine deployment took 3 hours to complete. By the time the Horde fleet arrived at the edge of the sector, they found themselves facing a battleground that had been transformed into something out of nightmare. Space itself had become weaponized. Horde fleet is attempting to enter the sector, the sensor operator reported. They're probing our defensive perimeter. Let them probe. Let them think they understand what they're facing. The Horde's approach was methodical and cautious. Their electronic warfare ships began broadcasting jamming signals designed to blind human sensors. Their point defense platforms formed protective screens around the larger vessels. Everything suggested they had learned from their previous encounter and were prepared for the kind of warfare humanity had shown them. They were not prepared for what humanity had been hiding. Detonate Grid Section 7, Colonel Chen ordered. A portion of empty space suddenly erupted in energies that briefly outshone the local star. 3 Horde ships that had been attempting to probe that area simply ceased to exist, their matter converted directly to energy by the quantum instabilities. Grid Section 12. Another explosion, this one catching a squadron of fighters that had been attempting to scout the human positions. The pilots had no time to scream before they were reduced to constituent. They're withdrawing, the tactical officer observed. Of course they are. They've never seen anything like this before. Colonel Chen's expression was coldly satisfied. But withdrawal won't save them. Not anymore. The next phase of the operation revealed the true scope of human planning. The gravitational mines that had been used to create the hyperspace interdiction field were suddenly reconfigured, their quantum fields shifting to create massive space-time distortions throughout the sector. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Horde fleet, caught in the middle of attempting a withdrawal, found themselves trapped in regions of space where the normal rules of physics no longer applied. Ships that tried to maintain formation were torn apart by tidal forces. Vessels attempting to jump to hyperspace found themselves scattered across normal space in random directions. You've turned the battlefield into a blender, Zephe observed, his voice barely above a whisper. We've leveled the playing field. Numbers don't matter when you can't maneuver effectively. Colonel Chen studied the tactical display, watching Horde ships struggle against forces they couldn't understand. Now we finish them. The human attack came from all directions simultaneously. Instead of the elegant energy weapons preferred by most galactic civilizations, the humans unleashed a barrage of kinetic impactors, quantum charges, and gravitational weapons that turned the battle into a 3-dimensional slaughter. But it was their psychological warfare that proved most effective. Broadcasting on all frequencies, the humans filled the communication channels with the recorded screams and pleas of the scouts they had captured hours earlier. They transmitted detailed descriptions of the fate awaiting any Horde survivors. They promised slow, agonizing deaths for any who resisted and quick, clean execution for those who surrendered immediately. The Horde fleet, already demoralized by the impossible physics of the battlefield, began to break apart under the psychological assault. Ships abandoned formation, some attempting desperate escape runs while others simply powered down their weapons and waited for death. They're surrendering, Zephi observed. Some of them, Colonel Chen agreed, the smart ones. What about the others? They die. The battle lasted 6 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt after the first 30 minutes. The Crimson Horde, the force that had terrorized half the galaxy, was systematically dismantled by an enemy that fought with weapons and tactics they had never imagined. When it was over, nearly 1,800 Horde vessels had been destroyed or captured. The survivors, fewer than 200 ships, were allowed to escape, but only after their crews had been exposed to carefully edited recordings of the battle, complete with human commentary describing their tactical thinking and strategic objectives. Why let them go? Zeph-Hi asked as they watched the remnants of the Horde fleet limping away. Because fear is contagious, Colonel Chen replied. Those survivors will carry word of what happened here to every Horde stronghold in the galaxy. They'll describe weapons that bend space-time, enemies that can turn empty space into a killing field, predators that hunt with methods beyond their comprehension. And then we'll find out whether the Crimson Horde is smart enough to know when they're beaten, or stupid enough to keep fighting a war they can't win. The aftermath of the battle brought a flurry of communications from across the galaxy. Admiral Chentar's congratulations were effusive, but Zeph-Hi could detect underlying concern in the Alterian commander's voice. The Alliance fleet had watched the entire engagement from their defensive positions around Kepler Prime, and what they had seen had clearly disturbed them. The methods you employed, Admiral Chentar said during the post-battle briefing, they pushed the boundaries of acceptable warfare. They achieved decisive victory with minimal Allied losses, Colonel Chen replied. Results speak for themselves. At what cost? You've introduced weapons and tactics that violate fundamental principles of civilized combat. What happens when other species decide to adopt similar methods? Colonel Chen's smile was cold and knowing. They'll discover that humanity has been developing these techniques for decades. We'll maintain our technological advantage. And if they develop their own versions, then the galaxy will become a much more dangerous place. But it will be a galaxy where the Crimson Horde no longer exists as a threat. She leaned forward in her chair. Admiral, you can have a civilized galaxy or a living galaxy. Current evidence suggests you can't have both. The implications of her words hung heavy in the air. Zeph-Hi realized that humanity had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They had introduced methods of warfare so devastating that they would change the nature of galactic conflict forever. "What have you done?" he asked quietly after the briefing ended. "We've ensured the survival of galactic civilization," Colonel Chen replied. "The cost will be measured in decades to come, but the alternative was extinction. You've made the galaxy afraid of you."
Yes, she agreed.
"We have, and perhaps that's for the best." Later, as Zeph-Hi stood alone on the observation deck, he contemplated the tactical display showing the debris field where the Horde fleet had died. Thousands of ships, millions of beings, reduced to scattered atoms by weapons that treated physics as a suggestion rather than a law. The humans had won a decisive victory, possibly ending the Crimson Horde threat forever, but they had done so using methods that would haunt the galactic community for generations. They had revealed themselves to be something more dangerous than anyone had imagined, not just effective warriors, but innovators of warfare itself. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrible question began to form. Now that humanity had shown what they were capable of, what would stop them from turning those capabilities on their former allies? The answer, he feared, was nothing at all. 3 months after the Battle of Kepler Sector, Commander Zeph-Hi found himself testifying before the Galactic Council, the same body that had once celebrated humanity's arrival as representatives of a promising new species. Now he stood in the witness chamber, facing questions that would determine humanity's future in galactic civilization. The council chamber on New Geneva was a marvel of architectural cooperation, its design incorporating elements from every major galactic species. Crystalline spires from the Shard Collective caught and refracted light into impossible patterns. Organic curves, borrowed from Alterian bioarchitecture, created flowing spaces that seemed to breathe. The Vulcan contribution of precisely engineered angles provided structural stability. It was beautiful, harmonious, and utterly civilized. Everything humanity had proven they were not. "Commander Zeph-Hi," the presiding counselor began, her Vulcan scales shimmering with formal authority. "You served as the official Alliance liaison during humanity's recent military operations. Please describe for the Council what you witnessed." Zeph-Hi looked out over the assembled representatives. Dozens of species, hundreds of individuals, all united in their concern about what humanity had revealed itself to be capable of. The testimony he gave today would shape galactic policy toward humans for decades to come. I witnessed the most effective military campaign in recorded galactic history, he said carefully. The Crimson Horde, which had conquered 17 star systems and threatened the existence of galactic civilization, was completely defeated in a series of engagements lasting less than 4 days. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The facts were undeniable, but facts could be interpreted in many ways. And the methods employed by human forces, pressed Counselor Veltan of the Shard Collective, their crystalline form chiming with harmonic concern. Unconventional, HFY replied. Commander, the Velkan presiding counselor said with obvious patience. The Council has reviewed your preliminary reports. We are aware that human forces employed weapons that manipulate space-time itself, conducted psychological warfare operations that violated numerous galactic conventions, and utilized interrogation techniques that bordered on torture. Would you characterize these as merely unconventional? The chamber fell silent. Everyone present knew the answer, but they wanted to hear it spoken aloud by someone who had been there, someone who had seen humanity's true nature revealed. The methods were effective, HFY said finally. They achieved complete victory with minimal allied casualties. That's not what we asked, pressed another counselor, this one representing the aquatic depth swimmers. Were the methods civilized? HFY was quiet for a long moment, remembering Colonel Chen's words about being monsters when monsters were what the situation required. No, he said at last. They were not civilized. They were necessary. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Species after species rose to express their concerns about humanity's revealed capabilities. The Velkan Empire worried about technological proliferation. The Shard Collective presented mathematical projections showing destabilization of galactic military balance. The Depth Swimmers spoke eloquently about the corrupting influence of uncivilized warfare methods. Through it all, humanity's representative sat quietly in the gallery. Colonel Chen, now promoted to Admiral in recognition of her service, listened to the proceedings with the same calm composure she had shown throughout the war. She offered no defense, made no arguments, presented no justifications for her species' actions. She simply waited. The evidence is clear, declared Counselor Yenthara of the Hegemony Worlds during the final phase of debate. Humanity possesses military capabilities that threaten the fundamental balance of galactic civilization. Their willingness to employ methods that civilized species consider abhorrent makes them a potential threat to all peaceful worlds. What do you propose? Asked the presiding counselor. Isolation. Complete quarantine of human space pending full disclosure of their military capabilities. Mandatory technology sharing to ensure no single species possesses weapons that could threaten galactic stability. The proposal had been expected, but hearing it spoken aloud still sent shockwaves through the chamber. Isolation meant cutting off humanity's trade routes, their diplomatic connections, their access to galactic civilization. It was one step short of declaring them an enemy species. The Council recognizes Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Force, the presiding counselor announced. You have been granted permission to address these proceedings. Admiral Chen rose slowly, her human form dwarfed by the massive chamber but somehow commanding attention nonetheless. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly to every corner of the room, despite its conversational tone. Honorable counselors, she began, 3 months ago, you faced extinction. The Crimson Horde had consumed 17 star systems and was advancing on the core worlds. Your military forces, for all their sophistication and nobility, were unable to stop them. She paused, letting the words sink in. Today, the Crimson Horde no longer exists as a coherent threat. Their remaining forces have scattered to the galactic rim, broken and demoralized. The immediate threat to galactic civilization has ended. This was achieved through methods you find distasteful, using weapons you consider dangerous, by a species you now fear. Another pause, longer this time. You have every right to be afraid of us. We are exactly as dangerous as we appear to be. The admission sent another ripple of unease through the chamber. Most species would have attempted to downplay their capabilities, to offer reassurances about peaceful intentions. Admiral Chen was doing the opposite. But before you make your decision about humanity's future and galactic civilization, I want you to understand something important. The methods we used against the Crimson Horde weren't developed in response to their threat. We've been developing these capabilities since the day we first encountered other species and realized we were the youngest, weakest, least experienced civilization in the galaxy. She gestured to the assembled counselors. Every species in this chamber achieved spaceflight thousands of years before humans took their first steps on their own moon. You've had millennia to develop your technologies, your civilizations, your military doctrines. We've had 63 years. We've spent those 63 years studying you, learning from you, understanding not just your strengths but your weaknesses. And what we learned was troubling. The chamber had gone completely silent. We learned that galactic civilization is built on assumptions that only work as long as everyone agrees to follow the same rules. Your military doctrines assume opponents who fight honorably, who respect civilians, who negotiate in good faith. Your defensive strategies are optimized for conflicts between rational actors pursuing limited political objectives. The Crimson Horde violate